Well, brother, good morning, and we come again to another daily devotion this morning, thinking once more about the third commandment. God said to his people, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain." You remember that yesterday morning I sought to point out the emphasis of this third commandment has to do with reverence for the character and being of God. The name of God in Scripture always refers to God himself in the fullness of his being and character, and so this commandment is given to us by God to ensure that we adopt a reverent and a God-honouring approach to God's name. We have to have respect and honour for God. Yesterday we saw that one of the ways in which this commandment is often broken, most probably the most familiar way in which it's broken, is by people using God's name flippantly, casually and without thought. When people say things like "for God's sake" or "Jesus Christ," and it's very upsetting when that happens. But that's not the only way in which this commandment can be broken. It can also be broken by taking God's name upon one's lips, swearing by it, and not fulfilling the vow that you have sworn. In other words, to make a vow before God, a promise, and to fail to fulfill that promise. You are taking God's name upon your lips, you are swearing before God that you will do something, and yet you do not follow through on that. To do so is to blaspheme the name of God. It is to take God's name in vain. So, for example, whenever a person comes into membership in a church, they take vows before God to fulfill certain responsibilities as church members. To then fail to carry out those responsibilities, to deliberately reject those responsibilities, is in fact to break the third commandment. It is to have sworn before God, in the name of God, that you would do such and such, and then fail to do it. We can apply this to parents who take vows before God to, whenever their child is being baptised, to bring their child up in God's ways. And yet those same parents perhaps don't take their children to church regularly, don't set them a godly example, don't have family worship, and so on. This is to take God's name in vain. Likewise, to say such things as, "Honestly, this is what happened, I swear to God." To take God's name upon your lips, when in actual fact what you are telling people is not the truth, is perhaps only part of the truth, is to take God's name in vain. So there are more ways of taking God's name in vain than perhaps we initially think of. And it's important that whenever we make promises before God and take vows before God, that we realise the seriousness of what we are doing. A man and a woman taking vows before God to become husband and wife and live together in faithfulness one to another without any other coming into their marriage, and then for either of them to be unfaithful to the other, or for them to divorce for unbiblical reasons when they have sworn before God to stay together until death them do part. This is to take God's name in vain. There are, of course, legitimate times when divorce can take place, but I would say that's probably the exception rather than the rule in most divorce proceedings today. So be aware, if and when you take a vow before God, whatever that vow, whatever that promise might be, God will hold you accountable for that promise. The Bible tells us it is better not to take a vow than to vow and not pay, because one of the things that we are guilty of if we don't pay is taking the name of God upon our lips in vain. So this is another way in which the Bible shows us how easily we sin, how easily we break God's law. And that's why the law of God is not something that we are to keep in order to make ourselves right with God. It is something that shows us just how sinful we are, and it points us not to the law for salvation, but to Jesus Christ. The law is our schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. In Him, and only in Him, will we ever find salvation. May God bless these thoughts to our hearts today. I trust you have a good day, brethren. God bless.